Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar on Genesys for core users. My name is Donna Long and I will be your host during today's webinar presented by Sarah Sumner. This webinar will discuss the differences between Genesys and core, migration from core to Genesys, and the value Genesys brings to the systems engineering community. Sarah works as an applications engineer for Vitech Corporation, using her 12 years of practical systems engineering experience to guide Vitech customers through the methodology and tool advantages available to them in core and Genesys. Sarah has experience working with a variety of industries, including defense, energy, and aerospace. Before Sarah gets started, I have just a few housekeeping items. We will be answering questions today at the end of the webinar. Please send your questions in as soon as you think of them through the question tab on the webinar control panel, and I will get them over to Sarah. The webinar is being recorded today. If you experience connection problems during the live presentation, a recording will be available within 1 business day of the live version. The recording will be published to Vitech's webinar archive located on our website. I will send the link out in the chat window now. At the conclusion of this webinar, a survey will open on your screen. Please take a moment to give us feedback on today's presentation or on what topics you'd like to see covered in future webinars. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sarah. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Donna. I'm going to show my screen here and bring up my presentation. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. So as Donna mentioned earlier, the purpose of this webinar is really to inform our current core users and the extended systems engineering community on our model-based system solution, Genesys. We're not trying to persuade you to switch to Genesys, but we have had overwhelming inquiries into what is Genesys, what are the differences between Genesys and core, and if the migration from core to Genesys is good for our current customers. And so we wanted to take the opportunity to further discuss what it means to migrate from core to Genesys, to give you guys the information regarding the value of Genesys in the systems engineering community, and also to discuss whether or not the Genesys migration is good for you. Okay, so the first thing we're going to discuss is the value of Genesys. So for those of you who may not have attended some of our other webinars, or who may are just now coming out of hibernation, you may be wondering what Genesys actually is. So Genesys is Vitech's next generation model-based systems engineering software. So what we have done is we have incorporated over 20 years of insight that we gathered from our core users and from using core ourselves. And we've taken that insight and we have leveraged an open architecture and modern technologies in order to essentially provide the model-based systems engineering solution that you're used to and love with core, with the connectivity that you can achieve with the modern technology of Genesys. The result of this combination provides to you a full model-based systems engineering environment. You're still going to have the lifecycle traceability that you know and love with core, but now you can expand that further with connections into the Microsoft work environment and to connections of other applications utilizing our open API. So you may say, okay, well, why is all of this important? So we're going to kind of go back to why an integrated model-based systems engineering solution is important in general. And the reason is because we are systems engineers. And what that means is that as systems engineers, communication, collaboration are very important to us. So we need to be able to communicate effectively in order to do our jobs. With core, we introduced the one representative model because if you remember, we combined those 4 systems engineering domains, the requirements, the behavior, the physical architecture, and the verification and validation. And we have all of that in that one representative model to include our technical management information as well. That model gives us various views and perspectives into our system design. And keep in mind that one of the primary benefits of our solution is those views and perspectives are consistent with each other. Okay, so we bring that to the table for the systems engineer. Now, we need to be able to collaborate. That one representative model enables us to be able to collaborate with our systems engineering team. But now with GENESYS, what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to expand that even further, because we have the ability to further connect with other applications, and with the Microsoft Office work environment, we have better ability to communicate and collaborate outside of the primary systems engineering team. So we can do that with our customers and stakeholders, with our domain experts, with our test organization, with our analysts. And so now what we are able to provide is we are able to provide a full model-based engineering solution versus just the system design that we are used to providing to you with Core. And this enables us to be able to be more effective systems engineers. With Core and GENESYS, we provide the automation to aid the engineer and to leverage our processes and provide insight into our design. With the extension of GENESYS, we provide more insight into that design with further defining different views into that design, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And we are able to be more effective because we are able to expand that solution and connect to a greater environment. So the primary benefits of GENESYS are that we are bringing what we know and love about Core and then expanding what the solution can be, because we can now essentially talk to other applications. We still have the underlying data model, but we are enabling you to be able to use that more effectively with our open architecture. This is going to provide you that full engineering solution that you are looking for with the model-based systems engineering solution that we have been promoting and enabling for years and years. And this will allow you to have a greater project solution for each of your projects. So as we're talking about this, and I talk about the benefits of it, most of the benefit that I'm talking about is the benefit of the technology shift. Now, and when I say most of the benefit, I'm saying the benefit of GENESYS versus the benefit of Core, not GENESYS as a whole, because the benefit of GENESYS as a whole is much greater than that. But the technology shift really does build upon the capability that we already have introduced to the systems engineer community. GENESYS is a database similar to what you're used to with Core, but we are using SQL Server and SQL Express. And why did we decide to do that? Well, the use of SQL Server is going to essentially make things a little bit easier for you and your organization in order to implement, because your IT organization is going to be much more familiar with working with a database that is based on SQL as opposed to a custom database like Core. One of the benefits of that is that we are going to see large project scalability, and it's going to be performant at an enterprise level. And you will see much, much better performance over a wide area network. Now, SQL Express is what you are going to get when you purchase GENESYS Collaborative Edition. And collaborative is the key word here. And the reason is because with GENESYS, you have the ability to have peer-to-peer collaboration. So what does that mean? So if you guys remember with Core, in order to be able to truly collaborate with your team, we had to purchase the Core server. Now, the Core server enabled a bunch of people to be able to access the repository and work on the same project at the same time. Now, we still offer a similar configuration with Genesys, with the Genesys server. But if you have a smaller team, so a team under 5 people, you can have 5 people, or up to 5 people, excuse me, connect to your local repository. So they could connect to the repository that you have on your computer. And you don't have to have a separate server in order to enable that collaboration. So that peer-to-peer collaboration does provide you a little bit more flexibility, and it allows you to fly under IT's radar if you need to be able to collaborate on that project. So another technology shift that we incorporated with Genesys is we are now using the .NET environment. The .NET environment is what is going to give you a little bit more intuitive user interface. It uses ribbons and panels, and it kind of gives a little bit more modern office look and feel. And so people are familiar with this user interface. The .NET environment also provides to us the extensions and the connections in any .NET compatible language. And that's really important because you have options in the language in which you can, in order to extend your solution. And because it is a .NET compatible language, there are more people in the workplace that are familiar with this. And so those people can write scripts, they can create custom reports to provide complex outputs, and they can create connectors to other tools. They're not going to have to learn a language that is not as familiar today as you would with Core. With Core, we had to learn Smalltalk, which is fine. It's not a difficult language to learn at all, but not a lot of people knew it. So now with Genesys, a lot of people are familiar with .NET compatible languages, and so you can utilize resources within your organization to extend your solution. And throughout this webinar, you're going to hear, and you have already heard me talk a lot about connected environment, right? So let's talk a little bit more specifically about what that means. So the connected environment, we have kind of 2 aspects of that. One are default connections into the Microsoft work environment. Just about everybody we know works in Microsoft products. Right? So they work in Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, Project, so on and so forth. So what we have done is we have said, okay, well, everybody works in this Microsoft work environment, and really and truly, when we are talking to customers and we're saying, okay, who is our competitor? Microsoft Office is our competitor, and the reason is because everybody uses it and everybody's comfortable with it, and so that is the environment in which they want to work in. So now we are enabling you to be able to work in that environment with Genesys. We have 3 default connections into the Microsoft work environment. We have Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, and Project. These connections enhance the communication with the greater project team. It also enhances collaboration because with Microsoft Excel, we have a bi-directional relationship. And so therefore, you can have people provide to you information in Excel, and then you can load that information into Genesys from that actual Excel spreadsheet. And it provides us the ability to produce quick and effective project reports. You know, if you're going to a meeting and you need to provide a quick presentation on some of the diagrams that you have been working on, you can very quickly produce those out of Genesys, walk into that meeting, show them, and then it looks like you spent hours on this presentation that literally probably took you 20 seconds. So the second part of that connected environment is the Open Services for Lifecycle Collaboration, also known as OSLC. So OSLC is a specification of standards for a way to exchange data between tools. Now, not all tools are accommodating OSLC, but the ones that are, you can essentially define what that data exchange is going to be between those tools. This is going to enable you to develop an interface with other applications and exchange information across the entire project lifecycle. And then this gives you that connection into that greater engineering environment. Now, currently, by default, we have an OSLC connection with doors. However, we can extend this based on any other OSLC applications that you would like to connect with. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide to you a very quick demonstration of GENESYS. Now, this demonstration is mostly going to focus on the differences between GENESYS and Core, so it's going to be very short. But I do want to familiarize you with the look and feel of GENESYS, and this can maybe kind of get your mind considering what kind of questions you may have for us or for me regarding the differences between the two tools. So I'm going to switch here to GENESYS. Okay. So this is GENESYS Spectrum, and you'll notice the collaborative edition because we talked about that earlier, where it does allow that peer-to-peer collaboration. You'll notice here that you do have the ability to look into multiple projects, and we do allow for cross-project relationships, just as we do in Core. I'm going to open up my geospatial library, which is the project that I usually use for demonstrations. Okay, so a couple of things you'll notice right off the bat. So the user interface is a little bit more intuitive because we do use the tabs here, and the tabs are context sensitive. So the functionality will depend on the tabs that you're looking at. Also, you'll notice that we have the Project Explorer on the left, again, very similar to Core. So essentially, the area in which you're going to navigate through that database is going to be shown in this left-hand pane. Similar to Core, we work left to right. The Project Explorer is where you're going to start your navigation throughout the database, but you're going to get much more specific as you work through the what we call entities in GENESYS. And so in Core, we called all of the data items elements, and in GENESYS, we call them entities. You have the ability to navigate through your classes, and you'll notice that the facilities here are now a drop-down list that you can choose from in order to display the classes of interest. You can navigate through your schema and your utilities here. You'll notice that we have two areas here, so one for scripts and one for reports. And this is going to be important to discuss because scripts and reports, even though somewhat similar, as they expand your capabilities within the tool, they are different from Core because they are based on a different language. So a couple of things to consider. So one is custom scripts and custom reports in Core do not automatically migrate to GENESYS. So when you are considering whether or not you want to switch to GENESYS, if you have a lot of custom scripts and custom reports, you may want to consider sticking with Core. Or you can contact our customer support to see essentially what kind of effort would go into recreating those in GENESYS. Now, if you're used to Core, you'll know that we have a very varied list of reports that we can produce out of Core. We have a list of reports in GENESYS as well. It's not as verbose yet as the reports in Core, but what we have done is we have created those reports in GENESYS that most of our customers used in Core. And so you'll notice that the system definition reports that you see here, the system specifications, our schema reports, risk, and IRS, all of those, to include all of our DODAF views, are in GENESYS as well. We will be adding to this list of reports as Genesys matures and as we get more feedback from our customers, but this is the list of reports that we have here. If you are interested in running a report, editing a report, or previewing a report, you can select the report here, select the report of interest in your browser, and then you will see the property sheet associated with that report. By right-clicking on the report in the browser, you can run that report, preview it, or even edit it, okay? Genesys uses a report writer, and the report writer does provide you some drag and drop functionality to be able to define the report in Genesys. And you can also essentially script behind the reports in order to create very custom and very complex outputs in Genesys as well. So now let's talk a little bit about the look and feel of the UI in terms of how you're going to actually work. So similar to Core, if I select the arrow on the left, you will see folder options underneath each of the classes that I have defined. Genesys does provide you the ability to organize your information in packages and in folders on the right-hand side. Now, as you start working, you're going to see the list of information on the right. And hold on one second. You'll see the list of information on the right, and then you will see the property sheet on the right of that as well. The diagrams that you are going to use when working in Genesys are going to be a little bit more intuitive in terms of the layout. So when you try to modify a diagram in Genesys, then you will have the ability to automatically, essentially it will automatically change on the screen there on the Genesys UI. Also, we've introduced a couple of new diagrams. We have introduced the class diagram, the constraint block definition diagram, and the parametric diagram. The class diagram is going to provide you a structure diagram similar to the structure diagrams we already have in Core, but this diagram is used mostly for software-centric systems and does have different types of relationships that can be created on that diagram. The constraint block definition diagram does provide the ability to show the hierarchy of constraints for a block, and it gives you the ability to also open a parametric diagram on any of those constraints. The parametric diagram is going to show you the expressions of those constraints, and so that you can see the values, where the values are coming from, and you can look at that. And this parametric diagram is going to round out our SysML diagram representations. So you'll know in Core, we provide to you SysML representations, but not all of them. Well, in Genesys, we provide to you all of the SysML representations to now include the parametric diagram. And so now we're going to go back and we're going to talk to, just give me one second here, the connections. Okay, so in Genesys, we have those three connections that we talked about. So I'm going to log in with my Excel connection. Okay. With Excel, we have a couple of options. So the first thing we can consider is we can consider loading in default dashboards. Now, in Genesys, what we have done is we have defined three default dashboards: requirement management dashboard, program management dashboard, and testing evaluation planning dashboard. So I'm actually going to load the requirement management dashboard so you can get a feel for what the dashboards look like. Now, as I said, these are 3 default ones. Now we can create more dashboards for you depending upon the information that you have in your project and what you would like to see. So this is the requirement management dashboard. Now you'll notice that we have the requirements overview, so the type of requirements that we have here, how those are allocated, the additions and modifications to those requirements. And this is important because as you're getting closer to a milestone review, the changes that you're going to be made, say for SRR for requirements, should be much more verbose than the changes that you made at the system level requirements at PDR. So you'll be able to see essentially the maturity of your requirements through looking at this chart. You can see the diagnostic errors that you have for your requirements. And for those of you that aren't familiar with core, diagnostics essentially check your underlying data model to make sure that you're being complete and consistent in defining that model. And the diagnostics errors really give you an idea into the maturity of your information and provide to you the ability to be able to catch model inconsistencies and model problems very early in your project. You can see your open concerns, whether or not your requirements are being verified, and what verification methods are being used to verify those requirements. So like I said, we have several default dashboards, but this is just one example. Now another option that you have is you can load a table into Excel. Similar to core, when loading a table, you can choose the table definition of interest. And because we're talking about requirements, we're going to use the requirement table definition. And you can see here that it defines for you the information that's going to be presented. You can load that. And then you'll notice that it provides to you a table in Excel. I'm going to change the width of this one just to make it a little bit smaller for us to be able to see. So, okay. Okay, so you see the number, the requirement, the type of requirement that it is, the description of that requirement, and the parent requirement. And this is completely customizable, so you can pick and choose what you want to show in these columns. And again, you can take this, you can provide this to your extended team. They can make comments in this, or they can make changes to this, and you can make a change. So if I change this from functional to constraint and then say publish my changes, notice that shows up in yellow so I can visually see what that change is and what's going to be published. And that's going to put it back into Genesys. And so now this requirement, this media request verbal requirement, is now a constraining requirement. And now when I run my diagnostics, because this is a constraining requirement, and I just happen to know, because it's my data, that it's not going to be allocated to a part of my system that's constraining, but diagnostics are going to tell me that we have an error here. So now I'm going to close that out, and we are going to talk about the PowerPoint connection. So the PowerPoint connector, what it does, it's one directional, so it just pulls information out of Genesys, but it does provide to you the ability to produce a presentation from the diagrams that we have in the tool. So similar to the Excel plugin, I'm just going to log in with that Genesys add-in, and I'm going to select the project that I want to work with. So we're going to work in the same project. And then I'm going to choose what information I want to publish. So we're going to publish our diagrams from our function list. And we're going to do a new slide here. And so what you're going to notice is that it is going to put each diagram on a new slide within that PowerPoint presentation. And then you could just take that presentation wherever you need to and provide that presentation in a meeting, insert it into another PowerPoint presentation, whatever you need to. And this really keeps you from having to go through the overhead of doing screen captures and modifying them and making sure that everything looks good, where you could just publish this immediately out of Genesys into PowerPoint, and you could build your presentation off of this. I'll make that a little bit smaller. Okay. So the last connection that I was going to show you, or connector I was going to show you, is the project connector. With the project connector, you're going to log in. There we go. And then what you're going to do is you're going to extract information out of the project. I have a project for my WBS information. The project connector looks at the program elements and program activities in your project. And so I'm going to select both program elements and program activities, and I'm going to load them into my project. Now, the project connector is also one-directional, so it only pulls information out of Genesys. You can't push it back in, but it does provide to you the means in order to present your WBS information in a very easy format. So there you'll notice that it has the task name, the duration, the start, and the finish, and it's going to have the Gantt chart as well. So we're going to X out of that, and then we're going to go back to our presentation here. Okay. So during the demonstration, we talked about some of the differences between Core and Genesys. So we're going to just give a little bit of a recap of what those are. So I want to discuss the differences really between them, and really why you want to consider sticking with Core or going to Genesys. So reasons why you may want to stick with Core. One, you're already familiar with it, and if you're, say, in the middle of a project, you may not want to take the time to refamiliarize yourself with another tool. Now, keep in mind that that learning curve for that familiarization process is very low. However, as with any tool that we start to use, you know, there is going to be a little bit of a gap in trying to find out where everything is and whatnot. So there will be a tiny bit of overhead associated with that. If you have a lot of custom reports and custom scripts, that may be a reason to stick with Core. Because, like I said earlier, you aren't able to migrate those into Genesys. We can recreate those in Genesys, but that will take some time and some effort in order to do so. So if you do have those custom reports and custom scripts, then that's something you need to talk to customer support about. If you are a heavy user of IDEF0 diagrams, so currently in Core, currently in Genesys, we do not have the ability to produce IDEF0 diagrams. Now, we are looking into possibly incorporating that in another version of Genesys, but right now we do not. So if you are using those heavily, you may want to stick to Core until we do incorporate that into Genesys. Currently in Genesys, alighting is not supported. For those of you who aren't familiar with what that means, in Core, when you have a diagram open, you have the ability to essentially hide aspects of that diagram. And a lot of people do this when for diagrams that they are presenting to people, to be able to concentrate some of the information on that diagram. We also, in Genesys, do not support the table view or diagram tables. However, we do have the Excel connector, which does satisfy a lot of that need for those views. And we don't support right now in Genesys the Notification Center or the perspectives. So reasons why you may want to change to Genesys. So the obvious reason is if you need a connectivity to other tools. Like I said, our goal is to really provide to you the ability to have a model-based engineering solution, not just systems engineering solution. And that connectivity to other tools enables you to be able to do that. The benefits of integration with the Microsoft Office tools is a good one. It really provides to you the means to further collaborate and communicate with different stakeholders and different people within your project. It also eliminates some of the overhead on generating information that you would normally use Microsoft Office for out of your data model. And so really and truly, that is one of the greatest benefits that you do get with GENESYS. If you need a more structured way to view your system constraints and parameters, because we did introduce the constraint block definition diagrams and the parametric diagram, you do have an extended views of those constraints and parameters of your system. If you are going to be using the solution over a wide area network, like I said, GENESYS is much more performant in a wide area network, and so you would want to consider GENESYS as a solution versus core. If you need to be able to tailor the tool, so you need complex reports, scripts to be created, and you already have resources that are versed in VB.NET or a compatible language, then you may want to consider GENESYS, because that is, resources that you would be able to use out of the box for our tool. And if you know that you're going to need small team collaboration and so what we call peer-to-peer collaboration, so under 5 people on that team, but you don't want a full IT, essentially, instantiation, then you can do that with the GENESYS Collaborative Edition. Okay, so what does it take to migrate from core to GENESYS? Well, it doesn't take much, to be honest. So GENESYS can read in Core 9 files. It's going to transfer the schema extensions, the project data, and those project relationships. Some things that it will not transfer upon migration will be the diagram layouts, customer reports and custom scripts, which we already talked about, permissions, and audit logs. So there is a little bit of a gap there, but not a whole lot. I mean, primarily the information that you would want to transfer is going to transfer into GENESYS. And we have not seen a whole lot of problems regarding this. However, we want you to be very deliberate about your decision. So when you do transfer or decide to transfer from core to GENESYS, or migrate from core to GENESYS, you cannot go from GENESYS to core. So the information will migrate from core to GENESYS, but if you said, oh, you know what, I made a mistake, I want to go back to core, and you've made changes to that project, we can't migrate that back to core. So what we are doing is we are offering a free 2-week evaluation for our customers to be able to familiarize themselves with GENESYS. They can, if they want, migrate their core project into GENESYS. Play with that, see if they like it, and then that way they only commit when they are comfortable committing, because we definitely want you to be able to be comfortable with that decision. And like I've said before, you are not forced to go to GENESYS. Core is here. Core is not going away by any means. So if you are comfortable with core, stay there. Okay, but if you do want to migrate to GENESYS, that's great, and we will help you do that. So a couple of questions to ask yourself. 1, do I have custom core scripts or custom core reports? If so, you may want to consider sticking with core or talking to our customer support specialist to see what kind of effort it would take in order to create those in GENESYS. Are you in love with core? If you are absolutely in love with core, and there's nothing that you are missing out of it, then why change? And then where are you in the life cycle of your project? If you're in the middle of your project, even though there is a very, very, very low learning curve associated with learning GENESYS, there is a little bit of one just because the UI is different and there's a tad bit added functionality. So you may want to consider migrating to GENESYS after you have finished your project, or once your project, kind of is on sustainability mode versus, have to get everything done now mode. So Considering where you are in your life cycle of your project can make the migration easier or more difficult for you. And then you may ask, okay, well, who can help? Well, obviously, customer support is the primary person that's going to be able to help you with this migration. They can help you assess whether or not the migration is good for you. They can give you an idea of the effort it's going to take to migrate from Core to Genesis. And they can talk to you about those custom reports and custom scripts and see what kind of work it would take in order to recreate those in Genesis as well. Okay, so do we have any questions?
Yes, Sarah. Thank you for your presentation. We've already received some great questions, and I encourage anyone who has a question to submit it right now so that Sarah can answer it live. Our first question is from Roy. He said, on slide 9, you introduced the default connections available. Do you have any connection to MS Word?
That's a great question. We are looking at connections to Microsoft Word. However, we don't have that connection right now. We do have the ability, similar to Core, to use our document parser that can bring information into Genesis from your documents. However, it's not a full connector similar to what you saw with the connector with Excel.
Okay. The next question is from Ronald. Does the Genesis data model include the elements in the core DODAF model?
Yes. Okay, so with Genesis, we do provide the operational architecture schema, which is the DODAF schema that you guys are familiar with Core. There has been a little bit of expansion to that, but yes, it does provide the same schemas, the same entities, the same attributes, so on and so forth that you saw with the Core DODAF model.
Okay. Next question is from Roy. What is the notification center in Core?
In Core, the notification center is, well, just kind of like it says, where you receive notifications. When data has been modified, depending upon your role within the project, you can receive notifications on changes to that data or to the project. And so that's what the notification center provides to you in Core.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute. Here's the next one. The next question is from Daniel. Without the use of IDEF diagrams and their ability to validate inputs and outputs at different levels, how does Genesis help resolve inconsistency between different levels of diagrams?
Well, that's a good question. And keep in mind that IDEF zeros aren't the ones that resolve the inconsistencies between different levels. You're going to see that with essentially any of our diagrams in any of our tools. For Genesis, the behavior diagrams, which IDEF 0 is a behavior diagram, the other ones that will be able to show those inconsistencies are going to be the activity diagrams, the EFFBD, your sequence diagrams, and your n-square diagrams as well. So the IDEF 0, even though it is a great diagram for showing that, all of the diagrams in Genesis regarding behavior will be able to expose those inconsistencies.
Good answer. The next question I have is from Jeff. Are there any changes in the simulator?
There have been some changes in the simulator, and I'm going to be honest, they are some smaller changes. So we changed some of the transcripts, I think some of the debugging functionality. And Donna, you may be able to answer this a little bit better because you're more familiar with that than I think I am.
I would say the biggest difference in the simulation capability is the ability to simulate replicates. That's not available in Core, that is available in Genesis. Other than that, you're going to see very similar capabilities.
Okay. And similar to the UI for Genesis in general, the UI for the simulator is a little bit more intuitive.
Okay, the next question is from Kristen. Is the schema in Genesis the same as the Core 9 schema?
So the schema in Genesys, we took the Core 9 schema and we did add to it for the schema in Genesys to accommodate those new diagrams that I discussed, the parametric diagram, constraint block definition diagram, and class diagram. But other than that, other than the expansion of the schema, it is the same.
Okay. Then from Dan, can I use a Core 8 project in Genesys?
You cannot. So, and this is a great thing that customer support will help you with. So in order to migrate to Genesys, you have to essentially upgrade that to a Core 9 and then do that migration from Core 9 to Genesys.
Okay, we have another question from Moshi. Is there any connectivity with MATLAB?
We currently do not have connectivity with MATLAB. That is something that is on our radar, and that is being worked internally into how that can work, but we do not have one out of the box at the moment.
Okay, and last question, unless people start putting some in. This is from Chris. Does Genesys support TeamView?
Genesys does support TeamView. That was introduced, I believe, in Genesys 4, and it behaves very much like the core TeamView that you're used to using.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. That wraps up all the Q&A we have. Well, actually, one just, well, no, I'll handle that one, Roy, with you personally. Okay, so I think that's all the questions we have. If you have any questions or comments for Sarah, please don't hesitate to send an email. You may send it to her. You see her email address on the screen, or you can send it to support. You can post your questions and comments on the Vitech LinkedIn group page. Just visit linkedin.com and search for Vitech Corporation. It appears that Sarah had some issues showing some things in Genesys, so if you have any follow-on questions, you can either contact her directly or support to get a more detailed presentation. That wraps up today's presentation. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. At the conclusion of this webinar, a survey will open on your screen. Please take a moment to give us feedback on today's presentation or on what topics you'd like to see covered in the future. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.